The applause started before I even set my fork down. My father stood at the head of the dining table, his glass raised, his eyes wet with tears he was too proud to let fall. The room was full, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, people who only came around when there was something worth celebrating. And tonight, there was plenty. This family almost lost everything, my father said, his voice catching. 3 months ago, I didn't know how we were going to survive. I didn't know where to turn. He paused, letting the silence do its work. And then your sister stepped in. Everyone turned to look at Elena. She was sitting 2 seats away from me, her hands folded on the table, her head slightly bowed. Humble. Gracious. The picture of a daughter who had saved her family from ruin. People clapped. Someone at the far end of the table stood up. My mother pressed her hand over her heart. I sat still. I held my glass of water and I did not clap. I did not smile. I just watched my sister receive praise for something she had never done. And I told myself to be patient. The truth always finds its way out. My name is Lena. I am 29 years old, and I have spent most of my life being the quiet one. Elena is 3 years older than me. She is the kind of person who fills a room the moment she walks in. Loud laugh, big personality, the ability to make strangers feel like old friends within minutes. Growing up, she was the one our parents pointed to when they talked about success. She got the better grades, or so our parents believed, because she always found a way to explain away the bad ones. She had more friends, more stories, more everything. And I had more silence. I was the one who came home on time. I was the one who did the dishes without being asked. I was the one who stayed up late helping my mother with paperwork she didn't understand, translating letters from the bank because her English wasn't strong enough. I did these things not to be noticed. I did them because they needed doing. But in our family, the person who needed doing things was not the person who got praised. Praise in our house followed by noise. It followed the performance. And Elena had always been the better performer. I had made peace with that a long time ago. Or so I thought. 6 months before that dinner, I came home on a Tuesday evening to find my parents sitting at the kitchen table in complete silence. That alone told me something was wrong. My parents were not quiet people. My father, Marco, always had the television on. My mother, Sylvia, was always moving, cooking, cleaning, talking on the phone to someone. The silence that greeted me that evening felt unnatural. My father had a stack of papers in front of him. His hands were flat on top of them, like he was trying to hold them down. I set my bag by the door. What happened? He didn't answer right away. My mother turned from the window. Her eyes were red. The bank sent another letter, she said. I crossed the room and looked at the papers. I had seen letters like this before. I had helped my parents understand them many times over the years. But this one was different. The red stamp in the top right corner was new. Foreclosure notice. Final warning. My chest went cold. How long? I asked quietly. 60 days, my father said. If we don't pay the balance, they take the house. The house where I had grown up. The house my parents had worked 30 years to own. I sat down. The number on the foreclosure notice was $72,000. That was how much my parents owed. Missed payments, penalties, and interest had built up over 2 years. My father had lost his trucking contract 18 months earlier when the company he drove for shut down. He had been doing smaller jobs since then, delivery runs, odd work, but it was never enough. He hadn't told me how bad things had gotten. I asked him that night why he hadn't said anything sooner. He looked at the table. I thought I would fix it myself. I understood. My father had always handled things alone. Asking for help felt like failure to him. But 60 days was not much time, and failure was sitting right there in red ink. Have you told Elena? I asked. My mother glanced at my father. We called her this afternoon. What did she say? Another pause. She said she was busy, my mother said. She said she'd come by on the weekend. I nodded. I wasn't surprised. Elena had her own apartment across town, her own social life, her own reasons for keeping distance from family problems. She loved our parents, I believed that. But loving people and showing up for them are two very different things. I stayed quiet and started doing math in my head. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my old bedroom. I had moved back home 8 months earlier to save money, and I stared at the ceiling and ran numbers in my head the way I always did when I was worried. It was a habit I had developed in my early 20s. When life got uncertain, I counted things. Money I had. Money I didn't have. Time available. Time is running out. I had savings. I had worked as an accountant for 5 years, and I had always lived carefully. No expensive car. No trips I couldn't afford. No credit card debt. I had built something quiet and steady over those years, adding to my savings account every single month the way you add bricks to a wall, one at a time, without making a fuss. The number I had saved was $74,500. The number my parents needed was $72,000. The math was simple. It was almost too simple. I knew what I had to do. I also knew what it would cost me. That money was supposed to be the down payment on my own apartment. The start of a life I had been building slowly for years. Giving it away meant starting over from nothing. I stared at the ceiling until 3 a.m. Then I made up my mind. Elena came by on Saturday, just as she promised. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and listened while my father explained the situation, with the papers laid out in front of her. I sat in the corner, quiet. I watched her face. She frowned at the numbers. She asked a few questions. She seemed, for a moment, like she might actually be preparing to help. Then she set her cup down. "I don't have that kind of money," she said flatly. My father looked at her. "We're not asking you to have it. We thought maybe together." "Dad." Her voice was firm. "I have rent. I have my car payment. I have my own things." My mother's face fell. "Maybe you could sell something," Elena suggested. "The car. The furniture in the spare room." My father stared at the table. "I'll think about it," Elena said. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and kissed my mother on the cheek. "I'm sure it'll work out." She left 20 minutes later. I watched her car pull out of the driveway from the kitchen window. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I had already made my decision before Elena even walked through the door. I had just needed to see her face first, to be sure. The following Monday, I called my bank. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my office building, the phone pressed to my ear, and I spoke carefully and slowly about what I wanted to do. The woman on the other end walked me through it step by step. I asked her to confirm the process 3 times. I needed to be certain I understood. I was going to wire the money directly to my parents' mortgage lender. Not to my parents. Not to a shared account. Directly to the bank that held the foreclosure notice. That was important. I didn't want the money passing through anyone's hands. I didn't want any confusion about where it went or what it was for. I wanted a clean paper trail that showed exactly one thing. On this date, from this account, this amount was paid toward this mortgage. The transfer would show my account number and my name on the sending side. I asked one more question before I hung up. Is there any way to make the receiving party unaware of who sent it? The woman paused. The payment will show on their mortgage statement, but you can request that we don't include a personal note or contact information. Please do that, I said. Then I authorized the transfer. $72,000. Gone. 3 days later, my father called me while I was at work. I picked up on the second ring. "Lena." His voice was shaking. "The bank called. Someone paid the mortgage. The whole balance. The foreclosure has been stopped." I kept my voice calm. "That's wonderful, Dad." "I don't understand it," he said. "The bank said it came through as a direct transfer, but there was no name attached. Who would do something like that?" "I don't know," I said. There was a long pause. "Maybe someone who loves you," I added softly. He didn't push further. He was too relieved to think too hard about it. My mother was crying in the background. I could hear her saying thank you to nobody in particular, just sending it out into the air. I sat at my desk after I hung up, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. My savings account now held $2,500. That was all I had. Years of careful, quiet work, reduced to a number that wouldn't last 3 months. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt something else. Something steadier than sadness. I had done what needed doing. Now I waited to see what happened next. Elena came back into the picture exactly 1 week after the mortgage was paid. I noticed the change immediately. She started calling our parents more. She came by the house on a Wednesday without being asked, which had never happened before in my memory. She brought groceries. She sat with my father and watched his evening programs with him. I was happy she was around. Truly. Our parents needed her. But then things started shifting in a way I wasn't prepared for. My mother said one afternoon, while she and I were washing dishes together, "Elena has been so helpful lately." I handed her a bowl to dry. "That's good. She's been checking in. Making sure we're okay." My mother smiled. I think the scare with the house really woke her up. "Probably," I said. My mother glanced at me. She mentioned she had been looking into some options. Before the payment came through. Doing research. I kept washing dishes. "She must have found something," my mother said quietly, almost to herself. I didn't respond to that. I turned off the tap and dried my hands and told my mother I needed to make a phone call. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the sound of my mother humming in the kitchen, putting the pieces together in my head. I want to be fair to Elena. I don't think she planned it from the beginning. I don't think she sat down one day and decided to steal credit for something she hadn't done. I think it started much smaller than that. When the payment came through and no one knew who sent it, there was a vacuum. A mystery. And Elena, who had been around the house more and had made a few phone calls on my parents' behalf that week, was standing right next to that vacuum. All she had to do was say nothing. And saying nothing, I had learned, was Elena's greatest skill. She didn't announce that she had paid the mortgage. She just didn't correct anyone when they started to assume. She let the story build itself around her silence. A comment here. A grateful look there. My mother filling in blanks that Elena never denied. By the end of the second week, the version of events in my parents' minds was clear. Elena had quietly arranged something. She had stepped up. She had saved them. I knew the truth. Elena knew the truth. But no one else did. And that, I told myself the night I finally understood what was happening, was not something I could let stand. I gave it time. I know that might be hard to understand. If you found out someone was taking credit for the most significant sacrifice you had ever made, you might want to say something immediately. I understand that. But I had learned, over 29 years of being the quiet one, that acting in anger was the fastest way to lose. If I walked into my parents' kitchen and said, "I sent that money, not Elena," what would happen? Elena would deny it. There was no name on the payment. My parents loved Elena and wanted to believe she had come through for them. They would be confused. They would not know who to believe. And the argument would leave everyone hurt and nothing proven. I needed something better than words. I was an accountant. I understood the documentation. I understood that the truth, properly supported, was not something anyone could argue against. So I went back to my records. I printed the wire transfer confirmation. I printed my bank statement showing the withdrawal. I printed the mortgage lender's payment log, which I requested through their customer service line by explaining that I was the person who had sent the payment and needed a receipt for my records. I put everything in a folder. And I waited for the right moment. The right moment came in the form of a family dinner. My mother had been planning it for weeks. She wanted to do something to mark the relief they all felt, to bring the family together and acknowledge that the worst had passed. She cooked for 2 days. She called every aunt, uncle, and cousin she could reach. Elena knew about the dinner. She had helped plan it. She even offered to bring dessert. I watched the preparations with quiet attention. I helped where I could, setting the table, arranging chairs, picking up extra folding tables from the neighbor next door. I did what I always did. I showed up and I worked without making a fuss. The folder with my documents was in my bag, which I left near the front door. I didn't know exactly when I was going to use it. I was waiting for the moment to announce itself. It did, about 45 minutes into the dinner, when my father stood up with his glass raised and the room went quiet and he said the words that I had been bracing for all evening. Elena saved this family. The room erupted. I sat very still. And I smiled. Because I had everything I needed. The applause went on for what felt like a long time. I watched my sister from across the table. She had done her bowed head routine perfectly. The modest smile, the slight wave of her hand as if to say, please, it was nothing. People were reaching over to squeeze her shoulder. My aunt was crying. My father wasn't finished. When we were about to lose everything, she didn't walk away, he said. She found a way. She stepped in when it mattered most. I noticed Elena's eyes flickering toward me for just a moment. I held her gaze. She looked away first. My father turned to me then, perhaps because he saw me watching. Lena, he said. You were here. You know what your sister did. The room turned toward me. I felt the weight of it, every eye, every expectation, the assumption that I would nod and smile and confirm the story everyone wanted to be true. Elena's jaw tightened slightly. I took a slow breath. Yes, I said softly. The mortgage got paid. The house was saved. I chose my words carefully. I confirmed the outcome. I said nothing about who had done it. Elena's shoulders dropped a fraction, relief. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I just wasn't ready yet. After dinner, while people were moving to the living room and the table was being cleared, I went to the kitchen to help my mother with the dishes. Elena appeared beside me a few minutes later. She picked up a dish towel without being asked. We stood at the sink together, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then she said, quietly, so only I could hear, thank you. I turned off the tap. For what? She glanced at me sideways. For not saying anything. I handed her a wet plate. I didn't lie. You didn't correct them either. I looked at her. No, I didn't. She dried the plate slowly. I could see her working something out in her head, deciding whether she was safe, whether I was going to stay quiet, whether this was over. It's easier this way, she said finally. They're happy. What would be the point of upsetting them? I didn't answer that. Lena. Her voice was lower now. I know what you think of me. Do you? You think I did something wrong? I turned back to the sink. I think you did nothing. That's a little different. She put the dried plate on the stack. The end result is the same. They're okay. Isn't that what matters? I didn't reply. I just kept washing. 2 weeks passed. I went to work. I came home. I helped my parents with small things, grocery runs, a leaky faucet, a bill they couldn't understand. Life in the house returned to something that looked like normal. But I was watching. I noticed the way my father's face changed whenever Elena's name came up. He had always loved her, but now there was something extra, a kind of reverence, the way you look at someone who has proven themselves in crisis. He mentioned her name in conversations with friends. I heard him once on the phone saying, "My Elena, she really came through." My mother framed a photograph of Elena and put it on the shelf above the television. The photograph of me that had been there before was moved to the side. I noticed all of it. And I felt something tightening inside me that was not quite anger and not quite sadness. It was the feeling of watching something become permanent. Of watching a lie harden into history the longer nobody challenged it. I knew I could not wait much longer. Not because I needed the credit for myself. But because the longer the lie lived, the more it would cost everyone. Including Elena. The second family gathering happened 5 weeks after the first. My uncle was celebrating his birthday. Most of the same people were there, plus a few of my father's oldest friends, men he had worked with for decades, people whose opinions meant a great deal to him. Elena arrived looking beautiful. She hugged everyone. She was warm and bright, the way she always was in a crowd. I arrived 20 minutes later with my bag. The folder was inside it. About an hour into the evening, the conversation turned, as it always seemed to lately, to the story of the house. My father told it to one of his old friends. The friend shook his head and looked at Elena and said, You must be very proud of your daughter. My father beamed. Every day. Elena smiled. I just did what any daughter would do. I was standing near the doorway. I set my glass down on the side table. I reached into my bag and took out the folder. I walked slowly toward the group. My father noticed me first. He smiled and made space. Lena, come. We were just talking about. I heard, I said. I kept my voice calm. I wanted to ask something. The group turned toward me. This was the moment. If Elena saved the house, I said, then who sent the $72,000? The room didn't go silent all at once. It went quiet in sections, like a power outage spreading from one block to the next. Conversations dropped off. Heads turned. My father's smile stayed on his face for a moment before his brain caught up with what he had just heard. What do you mean? He asked. The mortgage payment, I said. The one that stopped the foreclosure. The one that came through as a direct bank transfer. I looked at Elena. Did you send that? Her expression didn't break. It adjusted, the way a skilled person adjusts, smoothly, without flinching. You know what happened, Lena? I know exactly what happened, I said. That's why I'm asking you to tell everyone else. My uncle shifted in his chair. My mother appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, drawn by the change in the room's atmosphere. Elena. My father's voice was careful now. Did you make the payment? She looked at him. Then at me. Then back at him. I handled it, she said. That's not the same as yes, I said quietly. I opened the folder. I set the first page on the table between us. It was the wire transfer confirmation from my bank. Date, amount, destination. My name was on the sending line. This is the transfer that paid your mortgage, I said to my father. It came from my account on the 17th of October at 9:43 in the morning. My father picked it up slowly. The room held its breath. I set the second page next to it. This is my bank statement for October. You can see the withdrawal on the same date. $72,000, removed from my savings account. My mother had walked fully into the room now. She was holding the edge of the doorframe. I set the third page down. This is the payment receipt from the mortgage lender. I requested it directly. It shows the payment reference number, the date received, and the account it was applied to. 3 pieces of paper. 3 different records telling the same story. My father looked at each one carefully. His hands were completely still, the way they got when he was processing something difficult. He looked up at Elena. Did you know about this? He asked. She said nothing. And in that family, in that room, silence was its own answer. My father said her name once. Elena. Just that. Low and steady, the way he spoke when he was truly serious, which was rare. My father was usually warm, expressive, quick to laugh. This voice belonged to a different version of him. The version that had built 30 years of his life on the belief that family did not lie to each other about what mattered. Elena sat down. For a moment I thought she was going to try to explain. I braced for it, some version of the truth shaped just enough to cast doubt, to blur the edges, to leave a small opening she could fit through. But she didn't do that. Maybe she looked at the 3 pieces of paper and understood that there was no version of this she could reframe. Maybe she was simply tired. She folded her hands in her lap and she said, I didn't send the money. The room exhaled. My mother made a small sound, not a word, just a breath pushed out of her like something had knocked against her chest. My uncle put his glass down. My father looked at the papers again. Then he looked at me. You did this, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. What followed was not an explosion. I think people expected shouting. Maybe some of them wanted it, the dramatic confrontation, accusations, tears. Those things happened later and privately. But in that room, in the immediate minutes after Elena admitted the truth, what filled the space was not anger. It was something heavier. Shame lives quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles into the air and changes the temperature of everything. My father sat looking at the papers for a long time. My mother came and stood behind him and put her hand on his shoulder. Nobody spoke to Elena. Not because they were punishing her. Because nobody knew what to say. Elena herself didn't cry. She sat with her hands folded and stared at the table. She looked like someone who had been carrying something for weeks and had finally been relieved of it, even though the relief felt nothing like she had imagined. I gathered the papers back into the folder. I didn't show you these to embarrass anyone, I said. I showed you because the truth was heading somewhere it couldn't come back from. I needed it to stop. My father looked at me. His eyes were wet. He had not cried at the dinner 5 weeks ago, when the applause had been for Elena. He was crying now. My father asked me later that night, after most guests had left and Elena had gone home, why I hadn't said anything sooner. We were sitting at the kitchen table. My mother had made tea and neither of us was drinking. I needed proof, I said. If I had just said it without the paperwork, it would have been my word against hers. And I stopped. She's the one they listen to, my father said. You both listen to her, I said carefully. That's not a criticism. It's just how it's been. He nodded. He looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. I never asked, he said. How you were managing. Whether you were okay. You always seemed fine. I learned to seem fine, I said. He was quiet for a while. That money, he said. Your savings. Yes. All of it. Almost all of it. He closed his eyes. Lena. Don't apologize, Dad. I didn't do it for an apology. Then what did you do it for? I looked at the table. At the familiar scratches in the wood, the coffee ring that had been there since I was 12. Because it needed doing, I said. And I was the one who could do it. Elena called me the following morning. I almost didn't answer. I sat and watched her name on my screen through 3 rings. Then I picked it up. She didn't say hello. She said, I'm sorry. 2 words. Simple. Flat. Like she had rehearsed them and then decided rehearsing was wrong and stripped everything away. Okay, I said. I don't have an excuse. I know. A pause. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as they were okay. But I think, she stopped. Started again. I think I liked it. Being the one they were proud of. For once. That honesty cost her something. I could hear it. You've always been the one they were proud of, I said. Not the way they looked at me after that, she said quietly. That was different. I understood what she meant. There is a difference between everyday pride and the kind that comes from genuine sacrifice. She had borrowed mine. And for a few weeks, she had felt what it was like to be seen that way. Give the feeling back, I said. Not to me. Just, let it go. Let them know you properly. She didn't answer for a moment. I'll try, she said. It wasn't much. But it was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. My father repaid the money. Not all at once, he didn't have it. But he sat down with me 3 days after the dinner and he asked me to write down a schedule. He had talked to my uncle, who was willing to lend part of it. He had found additional contract work. He was going to pay me back in portions every month until it was done. I told him he didn't have to. He looked at me over the papers. You didn't do this to be paid back. I understand that. But I am your father, and I am not going to let my daughter start over from nothing because she chose to save this family. That is not acceptable to me. I didn't argue. He also did something I hadn't expected. He took the photograph of Elena down from the shelf above the television. Not to punish her. He put it somewhere else, not hidden, just not featured. And he put a different photograph in its place. One of me and him, taken at my university graduation 8 years ago. I was holding my diploma. He had his arm around my shoulders and he was grinning like he had won something. I had forgotten that photo existed. He had kept it all along. The weeks after were not easy, and I won't pretend they were. Elena and my parents needed time. The trust that had been broken was not between Elena and me, it was between Elena and our father, and that kind of damage doesn't disappear because the truth came out. My father was not a man who recovered from disappointment quickly. He forgave slowly, in his own way, without making speeches about it. Elena came by the house more often. She helped with things she had never helped with before. She sat with my mother on Sunday afternoons. She didn't try to explain herself or rebuild herself into something new overnight. She just showed up, quietly, and did what she could. I watched all of this from a careful distance. I wasn't angry at her. Not anymore. Anger is exhausting, and I had always been better at understanding people than resenting them. I understood what Elena had done and why, even if I could not excuse it. She was someone who had spent her life performing for approval, and the approval she found in those few weeks had been more powerful than her conscience. Understanding that didn't make it right. But it made it something I could set down. And I was very ready to put down anything heavy. On a Sunday in January, almost 4 months after the dinner where the truth came out, I sat at my parents' kitchen table and drank coffee with my father. The house was warm. My mother was in the garden. Through the window I could see her moving between the plants, checking them, touching the leaves. She did that when she was at peace. My father slid an envelope across the table. "Third installment," he said. I put it in my bag without opening it. He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I thought I knew my daughters," he said. "Elena was the loud one, the one I worried about and bragged about. You were the steady one." He paused. "I thought steady meant easy. Meant you were fine." "I was fine," I said. "You were fine because you made yourself fine," he said. "That's different." I didn't see that for a long time. I looked out the window at my mother. "You see it now," I said. "I do." He set his mug down. "That's the part one won't forget." We sat together in the warm kitchen without speaking. Outside, my mother straightened up, looked at the sky, and smiled. The house was still ours. And finally, so was the truth.